Hey everyone, it's Alex the Real Mr. Robinson, and welcome back to my chronological recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We're at part 15. We are more than halfway to the finish line, or towards the endgame, I should say, and today we're going to be talking about Doctor Strange. Now, why am I doing this next? Wouldn't the more logical choice after Ant-Man be Captain America Civil War? Perhaps, but who am I to judge? In all seriousness, though, I do have some reasons why I decided to do Doctor Strange before Civil War. And this movie was actually the hardest choice in terms of when do I actually review it. Because Doctor Strange is such a self-contained film, it's actually very hard to decide where in the timeline this actually takes place. But I have a couple of reasons on why I believe you should watch this before Civil War if you're doing a chronological recap. The reason I put this before Civil War is because Stephen Strange is told by Wong that while the Avengers defend the world from physical threats, the sorcerers defend the world from more mystical threats. So from my point of view, the Avengers have not split up, the Accords have not happened, and the Avengers are still united, even if it's the new team that we saw at the end of Age of Ultron. And plus, you can actually see Avengers Tower during the big chase in New York City. And a lot of people say you should watch Doctor Strange right before you watch Thor Ragnarok, but Thor Ragnarok takes place right before the events of Infinity War, and long after the events of Spider-Man Homecoming. And in that movie, Avengers Tower is evacuated, emptied out, and I believe it's supposed to be rebranded. So there's really no reason for Avengers Tower to stay standing if this movie takes place after Spider-Man Homecoming. Some people have argued that this takes place before Captain America the Winter Soldier because they utter Strange's name in the list of Hydra targets. Yeah, but right after that, Jasper Sitwell says anybody who could be a threat to Hydra now or in the future. So theoretically, Hydra could predict that Strange was going to be a threat to them in the future. So to just get to the point right now, because of that line from Wong and Avengers Tower, I would like to put Doctor Strange right before Civil War. And plus, with that line from Wong and me thinking that the Avengers are still united, it would be very ironic that the next film in chronological order would be about the Avengers' downfall. But hey, let's get into Doctor Strange. This, along with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, is the only MCU movie that I've seen one time in the theater, and never really had a desire to rewatch it again. However, I felt a lot more positive about Doctor Strange on my first viewing than I did with Guardians of the Galaxy 2. But I just didn't really have a desire to rewatch it afterwards, probably because a lot of this movie, in terms of its plot, reminded me of Green Lantern, which is never a good sign. But I knew I didn't dislike the movie at all, it just didn't interest me as much as some of the other movies. But this is actually the first time I've rewatched it from beginning to end since its theatrical release. And much like how with Mantis, I grew a much bigger appreciation after Infinity War, I have grown a much bigger appreciation for not just this movie, but the character of Dr. Stephen Strange. Benedict Cumberbatch obviously plays Stephen Strange, and I think when everyone first saw this movie, we were all like, oh, it's just Tony Stark, but with magic instead of technology. And later on, when these two characters would meet in Infinity War, we know that they were completely different characters, but I was able to tell a couple differences between these two guys initially, because Stephen Strange is a world-renowned neurosurgeon who makes everything about himself, really. He does save people, however, he'll only save people if the operations in question are challenging enough for him. He's not going to do something very simple, and he'll even go as far as to humiliate other doctors because they're not better than him. So you could tell that this guy is very arrogant, and it doesn't take long for karma to catch up with him in the form of a car crash where he loses his hands, his only tools to perform surgery and save lives. And throughout Stephen Strange's entire journey, when he meets the Ancient One, he has to learn to be selfless, he has to let go of the fear of failing, and he learns to become a lot more humble when he realizes that there are other multiverses, other dimensions, that the world is just so much bigger than he could ever imagine. And this is also a movie, much like with Guardians of the Galaxy, that really put the universe in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because while Guardians of the Galaxy took us to other planets, other galaxies, this movie takes us into other dimensions, and just the idea of introducing Stephen Strange and the Ancient One opened the door for endless possibilities. For example, Stephen Strange could open up another multiverse that leads into Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So think about that for a while. And Benedict Cumberbatch is really good in this role. He looks like Doctor Strange from the comics. Although I gotta say, when I first saw this movie, I was a little thrown off by his American accent. I just thought it was a little wonky, and maybe it's because I was so used to his British accent. But after watching Infinity War more times than I can count, I've gotten used to the American accent to the point where it doesn't bother me in this movie. There are a few points in this movie where he does mumble a bit and sound a little growly, but they're only far and few in between. And to be fair, those growling moments are when he's dying, so can't really blame him. Now, in terms of your side characters, we have Tilda Swinton as the Ancient One, which before this movie came out, there was just a ton of controversy surrounding her because the Ancient One in the comics is particularly Asian, and with casting Tilda Swinton, this is just another example of whitewashing. And yeah, this is a trend in Hollywood that I wish they would stop, especially after seeing Ghost in the Shell. But before this movie came out, one of the writers for this film, C.Robert Cargill, aka Carlisle from Spill, talked about the matter of the Ancient One and talked about how this character was just kind of a lose-lose situation. He pretty much made it the equivalent to the Kobayashi Maru from Wrath of Khan, where no matter what decision they make about the Ancient One, it's going to be a bad decision. And I absolutely agree, because with casting Tilda Swinton, you whitewash an Asian character. However, when you look at the Ancient One in the comics, he is kind of a stereotypical Asian mentor. So if you do that, then you're going to get the other crowd saying, man, that's just stereotypical. An Asian man teaching a white guy their ways. So I could definitely see what he means by this being a lose-lose situation. And I gotta say, when watching this movie back in the theaters and just recently, the casting didn't bother me because Tilda Swinton does a really good job. And plus, what the Ancient One is teaching Strange is essentially magic. And all of her students and all of the other sorcerers are multicultural. And you have Mordo in this movie, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, who in the comics was white. He does a really good job. And you have Wong, played by Benedict Wong. Kind of simple, but okay. I wish he had a lot more to do, and I hope that since Benedict Wong is credited in the poster for Avengers Endgame, that he'll get a lot more to do in that movie. But yeah, I like this character a lot. So the whitewashing thing, yeah, for Ghost in a Shell and Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's a huge problem. And with this movie, the big thing that Strange is learning is through magic, so I'm less critical about it. Now, if I could go back to Mordo for a second, one of the big things about this movie that reminded me of Green Lantern is the relationship between Mordo and Stephen Strange, because this relationship seems very parallel to that of Hal Jordan and Sinestro in the Green Lantern comics. But with the Ryan Reynolds movie, they barely spend any time together, and Sinestro at the end of the movie just becomes evil without any real development on why he wanted to be evil. With this movie, Mordo and Strange spend a lot of time together. You understand why Mordo wanted to become a sorcerer, and he didn't want to break the rules and dabble in the dark dimension. He was in complete denial that the Ancient One did the same, and when he discovers the truth, that changes his entire perspective, and when we see Stephen Strange doing the same thing, he just can't take it anymore, because how many other lies has the Ancient One been hiding from everyone else? So he walks off and is set up to be the villain for the next movie. You also have Rachel McAdams in this movie, who plays Dr. Christine Palmer, and she doesn't really have a whole lot to do in this movie. She's very charismatic, and I've always loved Rachel McAdams. But one thing I really liked about this movie is that they never play her as a love interest, because it's well established that they were exes, but they still have mad respect for each other and are still friends. So that's a nice change of pace and doesn't really force her into being Stephen Strange's love interest the way they kind of forced Jane Foster to be Thor's. Now let's talk about the villain of the film, Kaecilius, played by Mads Mikkelsen. When I first saw this movie, I ultimately didn't think that much about this character because I thought, okay, just another villain, not very interesting, not as bad as Ronan, Malekith, or Whiplash, but not one of the better MCU villains. However, rewatching this movie again, I actually got more of an understanding on why he's the villain and why he decided to take his disciples and learn from Dormammu and learn to take power from the Dark Dimension. And that's because he was a student of the Ancient One who came to her broken. Soon he realized that the Ancient One did draw power from the dark dimension, and he wanted more power. He ultimately turned into a villain because of his lust for power, wanting what the Ancient One denied him. He's pretty much the type of character that Strange would have become if he didn't learn to be selfless towards others. Again, not one of the stronger villains, but I actually enjoyed him more on the second viewing, and Mads Mikkelsen is just a great actor regardless. The action scenes are good. Not the hand-to-hand stuff, not so much, because this movie was the second of two Marvel movies in 2016, the first being Civil War, which just kicked ass in terms of action. But the action in this movie is not good for the same reason Civil Wars is good. This is good because it's very creative. Because you have a bunch of sorcerers that can disorient the world around them, it leads into some very creative action scenes where all these characters use the entire environment to their advantage. And there are points in this movie where it can get super trippy. When I first reviewed this movie in 2016, I said that the visual effects in this movie made the ones from Interstellar and Inception look just cute by comparison. In fact, I think my words are, "That's adorable. They think they're Doctor Strange." And I still stand by that statement because, man, does this movie get super trippy. Probably the biggest highlight of the film in terms of action scenes is the chase in New York City, where Kaecilius and the rest of his followers are chasing Strange and Mordo through New York in the mirror dimension. And I cannot imagine seeing this movie in IMAX, let alone 3D, because I think I would just lose my mind. And this is one movie you do not want to watch while you're high or on acid, because you will freak out. So I don't have much else to say about Doctor Strange. I ended up liking this movie a lot more than I did the first time, because it's got great performances, it's a really good origin story, it introduces us to another realm of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and one of its more important and powerful characters, Doctor Strange. It's visually creative. The score by Michael Giacchino is really good, one of the better MCU scores out there, although the Doctor Strange theme in this movie sounds very similar to Giacchino's Star Trek theme. So while I don't love this movie, and it's not even in my top 10, I'd still say it's worth seeing in your lifetime. I love that it's a self-contained film, and it just introduces so many more possibilities within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And even though this movie came in very late in terms of the Infinity Saga, it set up so much that I can't wait to see what the next era of the MCU has to offer with Stephen Strange as one of its major characters. The Stan Lee cameo in this movie is amusing. It takes place during the big chase in the mirror dimension where Stephen Strange and Mordo are forced into a bus that Stan Lee happens to be on as he's reading something and goes, "Ha ha! That is hilarious." And because Strange and Mordo are in the mirror dimension, Stan Lee is just completely unaware of them. So it's an amusing scene. The two stingers are interesting. The first one is a scene from Thor Ragnarok where Thor meets Doctor Strange. And like I said with the last review, any stinger that's taken from another movie is worth seeing once, but after that movie comes out, the stinger ends up being kind of worthless. But the second stinger is actually the more interesting one, where Mordo has officially gone rogue and steals the powers from a guy who also was taught under the Ancient One, who was once crippled and is now walking, played by Benjamin Bratt. And Mordo pretty much steals his power and makes him crippled yet again. And there you go, that's my recap for Doctor Strange. I definitely grew to appreciate this movie and this character a lot more. Now next up, it's the big one. We are going to dive right into Captain America Civil War. I might have a little bit of trouble with this review because I love this movie so much that I could just spend hours talking about it, but we'll see how long that video goes for. But first, I want to hear what you guys think about Doctor Strange. If you've seen it, what'd you think? What were your original thoughts on this movie when you saw it versus now? And where do you think Doctor Strange takes place in the timeline? I'm curious to hear what you guys think, and if you think it takes place long before Winter Soldier or right before Thor Ragnarok, just let me know in the comments below. And until next time, I hope you enjoyed this review. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and of course leave a comment. Don't forget to support my Patreon page, follow me on social media, and until next time, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.